Today we are going to talk about weed control, but I'd like to start off with the attitude that sometimes it's not worth getting rid of all the weeds. It's easier to learn to live with one or two of them. So, moving on, let's look at a few things that we need to know about weeds. To start off, we are going to look at what is a weed. The more we understand about how these plants grow and provide seeds, etc., we'll be able to design better techniques for controlling them. Then we are going to look at different control strategies such as prevention, and then ultimately go on the offensive and go after them. So let's look about weeds. We need to understand the enemy, if indeed they are an enemy. The more we understand about how they grow, what they need to survive, then we can better design techniques for handling them. Roughly, they estimate that 3% of the plants in the world are considered weeds. And it's not because they're ugly to look at, it's because they have certain characteristics that make them a problem, a headache. For example, there are some that have abundant seed production, and there are a few of them that you're going to see that you'll say, now I understand. Once the seeds are spread, they germinate very quickly. They're not picky. If they can find a spot, they're going to put down roots. The other thing that we don't realize is that these seeds have been around for a long time. They're in the soil. And anytime you turn the soil over, the seeds come to the surface, give them a little sunlight, give them a little water, and they're on their way. They are adapted to spread, and that is, they have unique characteristics that enable them to spread. Some are light enough that they're carried by the wind. Some produce their own little wings, so to speak, like dandelion seeds that will carry them. Some are spread by water. Some are spread by insects. For example, violets are often planted by ants. You wondered why they were all over your yard. The ants are doing the job. But you also help them spread. They'll be on the bottom of your shoes. They'll be on your blue jean as you move through the weeds and so forth. It'll be on your pets as they walk around the yard. So you help spread these weeds. And finally, they will occupy sites disturbed by humans. They will grow in places that you wouldn't think anything else would grow. And definitely the plants that you love won't grow there. So let's look quickly. According to the California Weed Science Society, look at the number of seeds produced for each weed species and notice how long they remain viable in the soil. The bottom one, Eastern Black Nightshade, just loves my yard, but now I know why. Before we really put down weeds totally, you may want to think twice about killing some of the native weeds. Some of these native weeds actually support insects. Now, that may not be our subject for today, but these insects actually are pollinators for some of our native plants, and they also feed the birds. So you may want to learn to live with one or two of your native weeds if possible. Finally, weeds do help us in one way. They are indicator plants. So if you look around your yard and you see that, I just dug up that plant last year and it's back again and again and again, well, they're telling you there's something about that site that's really desirable for that weed, but nothing else that you want. So if you see this happening, you need to do a soil test. And in general, the weeds may be telling you that the soil is too acidic. It's heavily compacted. Oh, absolutely. That's a big one. Has low fertility. Nothing else will grow there. Poor drainage. Yellow nutsedge loves that one. And there are others that are affected by the pH of the soil. So if you see weeds growing in one place more often than another, do a soil test. That will be one way to control the weeds. So now we're going to look at weed classifications. Most of us already know this, but if we understand whether it's a winter or summer annual or a perennial, then we can choose the right tools to deal with it. Winter annuals, by the way, you should be seeing them right now in Northern Virginia. Winter annuals germinate in the late summer. In other words, their seeds in the soil back in August and September. and they were just getting comfortable, kind of, scrunching into the soil. But suddenly they appear along the edge of the curb, along a pathway. Right now, I have some of the healthiest chickweed growing in this one area near my driveway. I've got henbit. I haven't seen the dead nettle yet, but I know it's coming. And of course, speedwell. So these annuals began their life really back in July and August. So if we're dealing with these and we want to prevent them, we've got to think about their growing habits in order to prevent their appearance. Same thing is true for summer annuals. They germinate in the early spring. Some of these seeds are in the soil right now, and they're just beginning to think about, it's time to wake up, time to go. Lespedeza, which is also called Japanese clover, horseweed, spotted spurge, will suddenly appear in the summer, but actually they are getting ready right now. So keep that in your mind. Perennials, of course, do put down seeds, but the real issue is they put down roots. And if you can't get rid of the roots, you cannot get rid of that weed. I bet there are a number of you who know ground ivy only too well because it keeps coming back no matter what you do. Same thing is true of creeping wood sorrel. By the way, that photograph is from my yard. I've got this one section that I keep losing the battle on. Horse nettle is another one, and false strawberry. By the way, false strawberry is not wild strawberry. False strawberry has the yellow. You see a little bit of the yellow bloom here. So false strawberry has yellow blooms, and it's also one of the indicator plants. So if you've got a lot of false strawberry, you might want to do a soil test. So keep in mind that with perennials, when we try to get rid of them, we've got to attack the root. That's the only way. Okay, so let's look at ways to prevent. And I've listed 3 here: using mulch, using landscape fabric, and using a pre-emergent herbicide. So if we can keep the weeds out, then that's it. So if we can put down any kind of barrier, it's going to help us. And keep in mind that compacted soil of your pathway is an opportunity for a weed to grow. We don't want to let them in. So a good defense is where we begin. If you have a lawn, particularly in the Northern Virginia area, fescue is the most common lawn. If you work to have the correct soil pH, proper amendments applied at the right time, and you mow high, you actually will crowd out the weeds. However, a thickly planted flower garden, is the one on the right, is not thick enough. The weed seeds move in, and by the way, this is mine, and eastern black nightshade sneaks in quite often. So I have to be alert to pull out the weeds. So let's look at using mulch. That's probably the most common one that people use. If you can't plant a lawn, let's put mulch on it. It has a lot of uses: maintaining soil moisture, minimizing erosion. It actually improves the appearance of the landscape, and it adds organic matter to the soil. But its greatest value really is suppressing unwanted weeds and grasses. There are several types of mulches. I'm not going to talk about every one, but I will comment on a couple of them. Actually, lawn clippings could be a great mulch, but if you put them down thick enough to create a barrier for weeds, it has a tendency to become anaerobic, and it stinks to high heaven. So you really probably want to use the lawn clippings on the lawn or in your compost pile. Pine straw is becoming another one that people are really interested in. Some people are concerned that it might make the soil more acidic, but as I did the research, I found other sites that said no, it doesn't. So actually, pine straw would be a great mulch to use. It allows water to move through, it's loose enough, it doesn't blow easily. Shredded wood chips and so forth are most common. The only downside to any of these is that as they begin to break down, guess what? It's a great place for seeds to grow. So you kind of have to keep it stirred up and maybe renewed from time to time. The inorganic mulchers are great. Gravel, brick chips, crushed stone. I have a wonderful pea gravel pathway. And for the first maybe 2 years, it was great. But you know what? Weed seeds find a way in all the time. So in my case, if I'm alert, I try to grab a rake and kind of move the gravel around to control some of it. But when all said and done, you may end up using an herbicide on your pathway just to give it some control. Landscape fabric may not be a good idea. I think we all see it, hear about it, we go out and buy it. I have certainly done that. But the bottom line is, if you put it down just plain and don't cover it up, it's not very attractive. So most people put it down to block the weeds, but then we put shredded wood chips on top or something else that breaks down. And ultimately, guess what? Weeds will move in and they take advantage of the opportunity. Plus, the material degrades in as little as a year, so it may be wasted money to put down the landscape fabric. So that leaves us with pre-emergent herbicides. And it really is an important tool to consider in your weed prevention strategy. It works well on lawns, but it also can work in other areas. For example, a garden path, yeah, you can put down wood chips and it's great. But if you have also put down some pre-emergent herbicide, which will last for 2 to 3 months, it will reduce the number of weeds. Notice I said reduce, not eliminate, because as you walk up and down that path, you're going to disturb the barrier that's created, but it helps keep it under control. So let's look at how pre-emergents work. They really prevent the seed from fully germinating. So the seed will start to germinate, but the pre-emergent will prevent it from developing roots. It cannot put down the deep roots that it needs to survive. And some of them will even affect the shoot of the plant. But to work, the pre-emergent must be incorporated into the soil by water, either rainfall or irrigation. So you've got to water it in so it creates a barrier in the soil. That barrier will remain there from 2 to 3 months unless you do disturb the soil. There are many, many, many chemicals that are involved in pre-emergent herbicides. The ones that the public will be most commonly introduced to will be, and here goes, pendimethalin, trifluralin, podiamine, oryzalin, and dithiopyr. Ha, nice challenge. But at any rate, you really need to know what you're dealing with. Some of the pre-emergents are fine around herbaceous plants in your garden, but the ones that are good for the lawns are not good in the garden. So when you buy the product, do look at the active ingredient. Interestingly, Virginia Tech even mentions preen, weedgrass preventer, in part because when you go out to the stores, which I tried to do recently, I really had trouble finding other name brands. But the preen weed garden preventer uses trifluralin, and it's safe to use around your garden plants. And one of the real things that Virginia Tech mentioned was that most of the products are packaged in much larger containers, meaning it's aimed at your lawn service providers, et cetera, and not at the homeowner. So these are in a reasonable size. By the way, the crabgrass preventer uses dithiopyr, and that cannot be used around your garden because it will negatively impact certain of the herbaceous plants. So here's important. Timing is critical. And depending on the product you have, read it, read the label. So if you're aiming to control weeds in your lawn, use the right product and look at the right timing. If you're instead going to be putting it in your vegetable garden or in your flower garden, again, read the label. Most of the pre-emergent herbicides will last 2 to 3 months. And as long as that barrier is not interrupted, it will be reasonably effective in controlling most of the weeds. But it's really important to understand that if you expect to put down seed on your lawn, you cannot use a pre-emergent close to the timing. In other words, you put down the pre-emergent, you're going to wait 2 to 3 months before you can put down seeds. So let's look at timing. For summer annuals, you want to put down the pre-emergent in early spring. And interestingly, Dr. Sean Askew at Virginia Tech took the time to finally discover that the crabgrass will start to germinate about the same time that this forsythia bush is blooming and dropping its blooms. So it's a good thing. It's telling us that it's a good time to put down a weed preventer, that it's going to impact a number of these summer annuals. As far as winter annuals, the pre-emergent needs to be put down in late summer or early fall, so end of July, 1st of August. One of the pains of the neck for many people is a grass called Poa annua. It is very difficult to control. At the suggestion of Dr. Goatley at Virginia Tech, I put down a pre-emergent at the end of July, and it controlled the appearance of the Poa annua. However, it could not put down any grass seed because I've created that barrier. So it's something to think about. And maybe you can, if you've got a nice healthy lawn, you don't need to overseed or anything. You can put down the Poa annua and get some control that way. So were there any questions, by the way?
Yes, Joyce, we have one question from Pamela. She wants to know, are pre-emergents or any of them safe for wildlife? Do they present dangers? And if so, what are they?
Most of them are considered safe. Here you read the instructions very carefully. Most of them are considered safe, but they don't want you to use them around water. Not safe on water.
Okay. That was the only question in the chat so far.
Okay, great. So let's now look at part two. We're going to go on the offensive. And we've got two ways to do it. Either we get out and do the digging or we turn to chemicals. Elbow grease, well applied, really does a great job. And for some of us, and I'm one of them, weeding can be a Zen experience. It's a wonderful time to kind of sit there, dig weeds, listen to the birds, watch a little earthworms crawl through the soil. So sometimes it's a great thing to do it yourself. For example, one of the things you really want to do, however, is be alert. The motto should be, if you see a weed, pull it up now. Don't wait. This lovely little nuisance weed, hairy bittercress, is a prolific seed producer. Not only that, the seeds germinate quickly. It is possible to have 2 to 3 generations of this weed in one season. When the seed pods explode, they propel the seeds up to, in fact, I've seen one source said up to 16 feet away. It makes certain that you can't get rid of it, that it's going to produce seeds unless you pull it up. So right now, walking around, I have noticed and pulled up a number of healthy looking, gorgeous looking bittercress. And those little white blooms are quickly going to turn to seeds. So if you're out walking, see bittercress, pull it up. As long as we're being alert, just thought I'd mention there is an invasive plant that's moving into our area that we'd like you to be aware of. It's Corydalus incisa or incised fumort. If you see this plant, it is pretty, but please dig it up. Don't pull it up because it does produce a little taproot. You want to get all of it so it doesn't spread. The American version of it, the native plant, has yellow blooms. Don't pull up the ones that have yellow blooms, just the purple. A little more exercise is good for you and the garden. So if you have a vegetable garden or a flower garden, frequent but careful hoeing in a garden will keep the weeds at bay. But at the same time, it turns the soil up, which means that more weeds can come and establish themselves. That's why you frequently hoe the garden, to keep the weeds from really becoming well established. There's one other technique. If you've got a plant that for whatever reason you can't get to it to dig it out, if you take your clippers and cut that plant back to the ground continually now, the minute it peaks up, you cut it back. You keep doing that, it denies the plant access to the needed nutrients and it will slowly die. So it's a good way of attacking the plant and not having to use an herbicide. By the way, it does not work on some woody plants. There are some trees that when you cut them down, will start putting up trees from the roots. And that happened with my crepe myrtle. I have been digging up crepe myrtle roots for the past year. So be careful on the plant, but most herbaceous plants will respond to the frequent cutting back. So when all else fails, we're going to use an herbicide, but please keep in mind that the soil is an active environment. You don't want to use too much of the herbicide. Use just what is needed. Unfortunately, Americans, well, I shouldn't just say human beings, have a tendency to say if a little bit is good, then a little bit more is even better. So you do it in cooking, a little more sugar, a little more of this. Don't do that with an herbicide. Please read the label, follow the directions. There are two basic groups of herbicides: non-selective, which means it's going to kill just about anything it hits, and selective, which are often called broadleaf weed killers. They are focused on broadleaf weeds, but will not kill grasses. In the non-selective category, they're divided into contact and systemic. Contact simply means it kills the area of the plant contacted by the spread. So I spray it, it curls up and dies. And as long as it's not a perennial, that's probably the end of it. However, if it's a perennial, you probably want to use a systemic herbicide because a systemic will translocate the chemical from the leaves through the plant to the roots. And you need to attack the roots to get rid of that perennial plant. Now, broadleaf weed killers are specific. So even though we call them broadleaf, it may not kill every plant that has a broadleaf. So that's a broad category, if you wish, but it will not kill the grass. It's effective at temperatures from 65 to 85. And this is really important for everyone to remember. If you're using an herbicide and it's 55 degrees, it's probably not going to work. It's wasted herbicide in the environment and it's not very productive. At high temperatures, so you're looking at 90 degrees, an herbicide should not be sprayed then because it's not going to be as effective. There is a window roughly from 65 degrees to 85 degrees. Now, some herbicides have a slightly different window, so you again read the instructions. But if you keep in mind that roughly 65 to 85 is the prime time for an herbicide to be effective, and this is for non-selective as well as selective. One other thought on using it is do not use it when precipitation is expected within 24 hours. But I need to add to that. If you are wanting to spray the weed and it's due on the leaves, don't spray. Anytime there's moisture on that leaf, it's not going to work. It's wasted herbicide. And finally, organic herbicides, which if we use them, make us feel better, think we're doing a great job. They really aren't that good except on seedlings. So let's look at a chart. I'm going to show you a chart from Virginia Tech, and it's part of in the reference thing, you can access it. It shows the 5 most common chemical combinations. By the way, there are many, many more than this, but it shows you how certain weeds respond to them. So look at it here. First of all, they list the weed. They tell you whether it's a perennial, annual, winter annual. And by the way, there are some weeds that I like winter and summer both, so they could be both. But the 5 combinations all contain 2,4-D dicamba, 2,4-D and mecropop, 2,4-D dicamba and mecropop, 2,4-D dicamba and triclopyr, and 2,4-D dicamba and penoxylum. Triclopyr is a systemic, and so is penoxylum. So what they're doing for the last 2 is giving them a little bit more power that the others have. Now look across here. Bed straw is susceptible to the first combination, but intermediate response, intermediate. However, for this combination, it's resistant to intermediate. So if I'm trying to get rid of, it has to be a field of bed straw before I waste my money on it, but I'm going to choose the one that has the S. I'm either going to go with the first one or the 4th one. But then it tells me the best time to go for it is not going to be middle of the summer, it's going to be in the spring. So one of the neat things about this chart, they will tell you the preferred times to treat. They're saying this is when the weed is most vulnerable to that particular chemical. Some of them, like if you look at black medic, spring and fall is okay. But if you look at bittercress, it's the fall. And by the way, you will see bittercress beginning to appear in the late fall. I think pulling it up is better than the herbicide. Anyway, using this chart, you will notice, for example, in buttonweed, that some of them are resistant to intermediate response. So when you buy an herbicide, if you're aiming at buttonweed, which really is a problem for a lot of people, you want to select the herbicide that has the best chance of working, which is going to be either of the last two. And even then, you're not guaranteed immediate success, so you may have to apply it more than once or twice. The full list is kind of interesting because it does point out that sometimes fall is the best time to treat a weed, but others, it will be spring. Like I said, we love to feel good about using organics, but what a lot of people don't understand is that the organic pesticide has the same molecular structure as the synthetic one. It may not be any safer, it just carries a nicer name. The most important thing to remember is most organic herbicides do not work on mature plants. They're good at seedlings. Anything that's just appearing, that organic weed product will work beautifully. But if it's well established, all you're really doing is injuring the little weed, and it's going to come back. Let's look at some of the organic products out there. These are the active ingredients that are out there. The one you've probably heard the most about is vinegar. Now, this is horticultural vinegar. Notice it's 20%. Your household vinegar is 5 to 10%. Household vinegar just doesn't work. It is non-selective, meaning, wherever it's sprayed, it's going to hurt it. But it's used in seedling. Once that's established, you cannot make this really work well for you. You'll insult the poor little plant, but it won't die. In this list, the one that some people hear about the most is corn gluten. But there's a problem with this as a weed control product. Corn gluten is also a fertilizer. And if you put it down at the rate to control the weed, you're also putting nitrogen into the soil. And if you don't need nitrogen at that point, it's wasted nitrogen. And that nitrogen will leach. It will go into the underground water supply. It will ultimately impact the water. We don't want to use corn gluten unless we really need it for fertilizing. So I do use it. I fertilize my lawn twice. I'll fertilize in September and again, probably in late October. My first fertilization, particularly if I'm putting down any kind of overseeding, I'm going to use a regular common fertilizer. For my second fertilization, because now the grass is well established, I will use corn gluten. And I need the nitrogen. I'm using it as a fertilizer, and I'm crossing my fingers that maybe, just maybe, I might block one or two weeds in the process. No guarantees, because by October, those weed seeds are pretty well established. So, a little drum roll here. There is another weed killer on the scene. It really is interesting, and it's worth being considered. First of all, it's organic. It's effective on many weeds. It actually works on ground ivy. You may have to apply it twice, but it works. Canada has been using it for over 15 years. It doesn't affect pets once it's dry. The only downside that I've encountered is that it stains concrete, clothing, etc. What I'm talking about is chelated iron, and the Fe stands for iron. HEDTA is the chelating agent. When you see it as an active ingredient, it may say iron, HEDTA, or parentheses Fe, HEDTA. The chelating agent manages to keep the iron in a soluble form. That's the purpose of it. It keeps it soluble, so I can now use it as spray on a number of weeds. And it's a broadleaf weed killer, which means it doesn't affect your lawn. In fact, if you were to spray your whole lawn with this, it would make it a darker green, might kill some of the weeds, hopefully, but If you got it on your sidewalk at the same time, you might see a little bit of an iron stain on it. However, I have played around with this. I've used it in several instances, and I have found it to be everything that I expected it to be. I did try it on ground ivy. I ordered a larger amount, so I had to mix my own. At the regulated amount, I found that ground ivy initially did not respond. But when I waited 2 weeks and I sprayed it again, I did get a response. And if you read the literature about it, many, many weeds are responding to it. There are a couple of sites that I reference that it's worth going to, one from the University of Maryland that talks about chelated iron. Any questions on that?
We do have a few questions, Joyce, if now's a good time to ask them. David wants to know if pre-emergence harm dogwood trees.
First of all, it depends on the pre-emergent you use, but for most part, it only affects seeds that are germinating. That's it. So
Okay.
it should have no impact on trees.
Deborah wants to know if any of the pre-emergents are organic in nature.
Iron is.
Yep.
That's why I mentioned it. It is an organic, and it's one that's relatively safe to use.
Joyce would like some advice with wiregrass. She notes that it grows through layers of cardboard and mulch. Any particular solution for her?
First of all, I commiserate. I'm sorry, wiregrass is a challenge. Chelated iron will not kill a grass, so it's not going to help with that at all. When you're dealing with wiregrass, please understand that it survives by putting rhizomes under the ground, stolons above the ground. It is really hard to kill. You're going to have to use a systemic and use it carefully. It's a real problem. Digging it out, when you first see it, if you dig it up and can get all the roots, you're okay. But once it's established, it's tough.
Deborah wants to know if you have any familiarity with Espoma as a product line and if you have any thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, it's a product line, and every commercial weed killer out there, they want to sell to the public. They're going to do what you want. So Espoma has a lot of things they determine to be organic. My key thing is I don't care about the name brand. Look at the active ingredients on the label. That's the most important thing. Go back and look at the chart. Make certain that you understand which weeds respond to which type herbicide. There are a lot of herbicides out there that will tell you they will kill violets. Yeah, if you keep spraying them often enough, it will. But it's much easier to dig a few out if they're really bothering you. So uh, they're trying to sell their product. You read the active ingredients and maybe do a little research on the active ingredient related to a particular weed.
Madeline wants to know if you have any guidance on whether it's better to apply herbicides in sunshine versus cloudy weather.
The warmth of the temperature from sunshine might make it work a little faster, but it's really just the contact that does it.
A few more questions here. Deborah wants to know about the potential for using corn gluten in the spring. Would that be a better timing to use that product?
Only if you're planning to fertilize.
Yeah.
See, that's a key thing. It's really a fertilizer more than it is a pre-emergent.
Linda is hoping you may have a recommendation for a herbicide that you can use in the lawn that will not affect clover, but will control other broadleaf weeds.
That's a tough one because clover is a broadleaf weed.
Yeah.
So most of them will affect clover. I don't know enough to say there's one out there that might not, but any broadleaf is going to affect clover.
A couple of questions around herbicide use for specific plants. So Ellie wants to know if you have recommendations for mugwort that have taken over her backyard.
Again, you really need to use a systemic.
Okay.
Something that has a systemic in it. I will share with you that I let some get involved. It took me forever, and it wasn't even responding to the systemic the way I wanted it to. So I bought some pond liner, small section of it, and covered it up and left it there for a couple of years, and it went away. So best I
Uh,
can offer.
Libby has a similar question around lesser celandine and creeping Charlie.
Ground ivy is
Yeah.
also called creeping Charlie, and actually will respond to the chelated iron.
Marjorie has the same question about stiltgrass.
Stiltgrass is a little interesting, and I'll share with you, I actually tried the chelated iron on the stiltgrass, and it did work, but it took the second application. So yes, it should work on stiltgrass. I'd say give it a try and watch it.
No more questions right now in the chat, so we can keep going.
There are a number of products out there that have chelated iron. I ended up purchasing Fiesta, which came in a large container, and I've got enough for 5 years. or maybe 10. So you don't really need that much. However, the smaller amounts, Bonite is coming out with spray bottles of the chelated iron, different brand names. So my last thing I'm going to talk about is some tools that will help you get rid of the weeds. On the left, you will see 3 cylinders. They are 4-inch PVC sewer pipe. They're really easy to cut, and I cut them in different lengths so I could use them for different things. But any cylinder, such as the coffee can, as long as it's open at both ends, will work. I love my little tiny paring knife, so when I do decide to take on violets, they're easy to remove with a paring knife. Dandelions, of course, any kind of digger. My favorite is a old screwdriver that has this really long shaft. It's my favorite tool. And of course, a trowel. But you'll also notice I've got a long stake here, or a stick, and some plastic from a newspaper sleeve. And here's how to use it. I'm going to use an herbicide that I don't want to spread. I'm going to use, in fact, a systemic in a lawn. Now, actually, I would really dig out the dandelion normally, but dandelions can produce huge roots. This one is almost 18 inches long. Now, admittedly, it was in a frequently turned garden that had been allowed to go to seed, and so, boy, that root went really deep, and even then, it's broken off. So these guys, once they're well established, can put down a deep root. So what I did, now this is just as a sample, I would normally dig it up, but I took one of the cylinders, I carefully reached down into the cylinder and lifted up as many of the dandelion leaves as possible. And then I used glyphosate in this case to spray the weeds. Now, by the way, you're really frustrated and angry, and so you don't squeeze once, you do 3, 4, 5, 6 times. You only need once or twice. You need to have the herbicide touch the leaves only. The leaves will translocate that herbicide to the root, and it will eventually kill the plant. So I'm using this container to keep the herbicide from spreading anywhere else. I'm focusing just on that one plant. I actually did it for a friend of mine who had horse nettle growing in his vegetable garden. But I went a step further. I even created a little cylinder, paper cylinder, that I put around the base of the horse nettle to protect the soil. I put the sleeve around the horse nettle, and I use my glyphosate on it. Glyphosate will dry in about 30 minutes, and it is not toxic to anything that touches the leaf, by the way. It took about 2 weeks, but pretty soon the horse nettle disappeared. So it's possible to attack some of these weeds very selectively with a systemic herbicide. Here's one other use, and this is my final slide. If you've got a vine, it could be porcelainberry, field bindweed, greenbrier, that is growing in an area where you really cannot easily get to it. What you do is you take a stake, put it into the ground, and you encourage the plant to grow up around the stake. I've heard of some people who are so devious, they even fertilize the vine so it'll grow even better. It climbs up the stake. You then put the sleeve from a newspaper, open at both ends, slide it down over the stake as far as the newspaper sleeve will cover, tie it at the bottom, open it at the top, and again, you use a systemic. You spray the leaf. You don't need to spray the whole thing. You just need to cover the leaves. Dries in about 30 minutes. You remove it, and then about 2 weeks later, roughly, you will see the leaves beginning to shrivel and go away. Now, if it's a well-established vine, you may have to do it multiple times. Greenbrier is one that once it's really established, it's going to take a while. And I'll be honest, it took me 3 years, but I succeeded in getting greenbrier out of my azaleas. So it's possible to use these herbicides, the systemic glyphosate, carefully. You control pesticide drift, it's very focused, and you don't overuse your product. So that's my last slide for today. Are there any questions?
Just a few more questions, Joyce. Looking for some more specific advice around control for specific weeds. Alexander wants to know if chelated iron will work on Lespedeza and violets, and if not, if you have other recommendations for those plants.
Well, personally have not tried them, but I would say it would. And Lespedeza is a summer annual. And so it can be controlled with the pre-emergent herbicide, should be, if you put it down at the right time. Violets, the ants are busy planting them. Probably the easiest way is to dig them up in the spring, and that's the important time. You don't want them to produce seed.
Hmm. Patricia has a similar question about Italicum aurum. If you have a recommendation for that particular weed.
Oh, that's a pretty invasive plant too, the Italian arum. If you've only got one or two plants, I would suggest capturing it within a sleeve of plastic or a cylinder and using a systemic.
Okay. Libby has the same question about nutgrass.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. But unfortunately, the term is grass, which means your broadleaf weed killers won't work. That means that the chelated iron won't work on it either. So there are some very special products out there that are aimed at the different sedges. And I can't think of the chemicals involved right now, but they are labeled specifically for sedges.
Madeline isn't sure if it's a weed or not, but was wondering if you have recommendations for eliminating poison ivy.
You need a systemic, either using glyphosate or triclopyr. They're usually called brush killers, and they're really very effective on poison ivy.
Okay. Lynn has questions about the mechanical process of removing weeds. He wants to know if tilling the soil in a shallow basis or deeply, will that encourage or discourage?
It does both. No. So what it really does, if you're working in, say, your vegetable garden, what you want to do is just keep the weeds from really getting very high. So little careful hoeing down the roads will interrupt the growth of whatever weed is growing at that point, but it turns the soil, meaning, another weed seed is available. So that's why in a vegetable garden, you will do hoeing fairly frequently, just maintaining control.
Karen has a question about a chameleon plant. She has a well-established patch of it in her garden. The roots snap when she's digging them, and then they always come back. So, any suggestions for her on chameleon plant?
She really has a tough deal. I'm sorry about that. And it's tough to kill them. However, I don't know about chelated iron being a possibility. That's something relatively new to me as I read about it. And because the weed does have a broadleaf, it may respond to it. Otherwise, it is really difficult to deal with this plant. Once established, it's a tough one.
Yeah. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I do know that one person is noting a little bit of displeasure about the use of herbicides, but I'll just encourage them to go back in the presentation and focus in on the parts of the conversation that you were leading, Joyce, about organic control methods as well. But it looks like that's it in terms of the questions so far. So, Joyce, any last words from you before we wrap this up?
No, by the way, please send questions to the help desk. Send us photographs of the weed. We can do a little bit more research and give you specific responses for whatever your issue might be.
Right. Great. Well, thank you, Joyce, for your wisdom and sharing your time and perspectives with us today. I want to thank you for all of your knowledge and for educating us all. And thanks to everybody here on the MGNV staff. And thank you all for being our participants today. These references that Joyce has kindly pulled together for us will be shared back with you. But with that, I will thank everybody again and hope that you all have a really great weekend. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you for listening.